I'm Adam. I work in an animation studio in Luxembourg. It's called Melusine Productions to the public, and it's also called Studio 352 within the industry. It's a little bit complicated, but that's how it is. And we do almost entirely traditional animation, meaning we draw each frame by hand the traditional way. It's all done with digital technology, so we don't use paper, and we can make every part of the animation process. So we do writing, storyboarding, we make the scenery, and we do all of the stages of animation. It's like a long pipeline. We don't do any of the acting or music recording. That's done somewhere else. And we almost always work in association with another studio. So for example, on Wolfwalkers, we worked with Cartoon Saloon in Ireland. It was their film, and we did more or less half of the work on it. And that's almost always how we work. We don't make any feature films ourselves. I think we made one a long time ago. What else to say? So my job is, at the moment, it's animating. I animate each frame. Often I do what's called cleanup animation, also known as assistant animation. So we get the rough animation from the animator, and then we draw the final line on everything, which is a skill set itself, different to animation, but closely related. And that's what I did for Wolfwalkers and other films like that. And I sometimes do color as well, so coloring all of the animation. That's really simple to do. And various other things in the studio. So on my contract it says animator, but that covers a lot of different duties. Well, yeah, I can talk a little bit about how I got there. So I studied animation at university. I went first to art college. So in the UK you have high school and then college and then university. So I went to college and did art and design and specialized in multimedia because I already knew at that stage I wanted to do animation. And then with that achievement, I was able to enter an animation, a university in the UK that teaches animation, and studied animation for 3 years. And they taught me the basic skills for animation. By that I mean drawing motion, making characters move, putting life and expression into characters, and sometimes putting expression into objects to show that we can make things emote. So for example, we had an exercise which was taking a pillow which had no facial features, no arms or anything, and making it move as if it was alive and showing sadness and happiness and things with a pillow. So that was a really nice exercise. And then there were exercises to show characters carrying a heavy weight and showing old characters and young characters. So the main thing that the university taught us was the kind of skills required in animation, like drawing, sort of bringing life to the screen, which is really the true meaning of animation. It's bringing life to things. And then from there, I graduated a long time ago, kind of an embarrassingly long time ago, I suppose. And then it's a very difficult industry to get into. It was back then, and it still is. And so I wasn't able to get immediately into animation, and I had to do some boring day jobs for a few years. And I think it was, let's see, about 7 years altogether. I wasn't able to actually get into the animation industry, but that whole time I was going to animation festivals, meeting people, making contacts, working on my skills, making short films myself, and always drawing and sometimes painting and keeping my skills relevant, learning new software and things like that. And this is the reality for a lot of people, is that you graduate and you don't walk straight into your dream job, but you have to keep working on your skills in your spare time and work on a day job in the daytime. So for a long time I did that, and then through a contact I made, who was also a close friend of mine, I was able to get a position in Croatia, in Zagreb, working in an animation studio. That's kind of an interesting story because the idea was that I was going over to Croatia to volunteer on a stop motion film. So I guess you know what stop motion is. It's like puppet animation, physical stuff. And I was going on a volunteer basis, which is a good way to get into the industry. But, well, when I arrived there, my friend wasn't there, but I was able to get into his apartment with another friend. And there was a note there saying, unfortunately, something has happened on this project we're working on, kind of a political drama situation where we've had a falling out with the boss on the project, the producer. And so it's not a good idea for you to join on this project anymore, sadly. But somehow he was able to make another contact for me and get me a position on a 2D film, which is where my skills really are. So I was able to skip the step of working on a stop motion project, which is a shame because I really would have enjoyed it. But then I could go straight to a 2D project in Croatia, and that was really my first major project in animation, first professional project. It was the foot in the door. And that was working on a short film called Traveling Country. It was a collaboration between Croatia and a Bulgarian studio. And then I was supposed to work on a kind of Swiss-Croatian collaboration. There was kind of a similar story there. Before I was able to begin, there was another problem. Actually, this was more to do with working visas and things like that, because I was promised a position on this project, but then I waited for a long time to be invited over, and eventually they said, we can't take you because you're British and they only want Swiss or Croatian people. This is before Brexit, but they only want Swiss and Croatian people because of the tax arrangement on this. And because I'd been waiting for around 3 months at that point, not working in Zagreb, that was my cue to leave. There wasn't anything left for me there. So I came back to the UK, back living with my parents. And this is kind of depressing, really, when you've been in a professional situation and then you eventually have to go back and live with your parents. And I was nearly 30. I think I was about 29 at this point. So it's kind of a bit of a roller coaster sometimes. But again, I kept working on my skills, and fairly quickly I got a position in Luxembourg, where I am now. And this is through a chain of contacts I had made when I was in Croatia. A friend of mine there knew someone who knew someone who was able to offer me a position. So I sent an email to the studio to work on a film called Ethel and Ernest, which I didn't work on in the end. But it was, I didn't actually know where it was. I assumed it was in London because the film was based mainly in London at this studio, Lupus. And so I made an application. And what you usually have to do in animation, 2D animation, is you don't do a job interview, but you do an animation test. So they send you a basic scene to work on, and they say, can you animate this scene? Can you draw the frames and send it back to us, and we'll tell you if you're a good fit for this project or not. So I did this, and then they said, yeah, it looks good. You can come and join us. Here's the address in Luxembourg. And I was like, what do you mean Luxembourg? I thought it was going to be in London. But it's better anyway, because I still wanted to travel at that point. I didn't really want to work in London too much, so that was quite nice. But once again, before I could get here, things things changed and they didn't need me on that project, but they still brought me over here. And I ended up working on The Breadwinner, which is another project with Cartoon Saloon. And on this film, I didn't do animation, but I did what's called tonal, like tonal FX. So this means putting all of the shadows and the shading onto the characters in a very flat 2D kind of way. Again, frame by frame, you have to draw, for every frame, you have to put all of the shading onto each character and the shadows cast onto things by each character. And I didn't really need any training to do that, although I hadn't done anything like it before. I had enough related skills that they were able to bring me aboard. And I think at this point, seeing as we're running, I made a little short, well, actually a much longer short film of my own. And this I had been making for around 6 years, just when I could. I would make a little extra part on it. It was much richer in image than the last one I made. It was kind of like a passion project. And yeah, finally finished it at that point after I came back from Luxembourg. And I think you have the little teaser trailer. Film I made, and again enter that into a whole load of animation festivals, which is mostly free to do, and then when you get selected they invite you to come and be a guest, and they sometimes pay for accommodation and food and things like that. And this film went to now where did they show that? I think they showed it in Ukraine, but I wasn't able to go at that time. Russia, strangely enough, so it was fairly popular in the East. And I went to St. Petersburg to go and meet some people and show the film there. And then a few months, it was about a year since I left Luxembourg that they invited me back to Luxembourg to come and work on the next project. And I was very happy that they were genuinely, happy with my work last time. They weren't just saying it to be nice, but they were pleased with me, and so they actually invited me back. And then I worked on this film. When I came back, they were working on this film called The Swallows of Kabul, and this was with a French studio called Les Armateurs. And on this one I had to do coloring and lighting, so it was similar to the shadows I did on The Breadwinner. So you can see here it has a very distinctive style, which I love, to be honest with you. I really like the way it looks. It looks like it's all hand painted. Again, pretty much everything we do is digital. And then that was the next major film I worked on, which is Wolfwalkers. I guess you've all seen that, or most of you have seen that one. So yeah, as I was saying, I was on Breadwinners, I was doing the shadows. On Swallows of Kabul, I did the color and the lighting. And then on Wolfwalkers, I was doing the cleanup. So cleanup is also known as assistant animation, and what that means is you draw the final line on everything. You draw the lines that the viewers eventually see on the screen, and also you finish the animation. You put in all the missing frames into the animation, and sometimes you correct little details in the animation. So it requires a really high degree of precision. And you can see a model sheet here for, I think, the Robin wolf. And for the wolves, we had to, everything you see here, we had to draw on screen. So all of the sketching lines and all of the hairs and all of the detail around the eyes, we had to replicate on every frame and put that on screen. And the blue lines you can see around here, we had to draw, but then the viewer wouldn't see them in the end because they're there for color separations. It would show the color department where to change the color, but there would be no line on there in the end. So that's a model for one of the soldiers. And these were really not fun to draw, to be honest, because again, all of the details have to be consistent on every frame. So you can see on his armor here, the proportions had to remain the same all of the time, and on the face guard here, if you make a mistake, it's okay, but they either the local supervisor in Luxembourg or the supervisor in Ireland sends it back and says, can you change this? Can you keep working on it and correct it? So you don't get away with letting any details slip. Every single scene, we do our part on the scene, and then we send it to the local supervisor, and they check every frame. As I'm sure you know, animation is extremely time consuming. It takes a very long time, and it takes a lot of labor. So the supervisor checks every frame, and sometimes, yeah, the tiniest mistakes you can get away with, but really most things where the proportions change and the eye can see it, they would send it back and say, make it more precise, work on it again, and that wastes time for everyone. So we have to try and do things to a really high standard of quality on the first time. And this is Sean Bean's character with his crossbow. So obviously the crossbow is a prop, and this follows the same rules I was talking about. It has to be to a high standard, and the proportions have to remain consistent on every frame. And this, I think the animator and then the assistant animator would use the same model sheet here, because it's useful for both of them. This is not a model sheet, but it's an expression sheet. Down here it says conceptual artwork. So this helps the animator see when they're animating Maeve, it would show the animator some examples for expressions. So it helps them know how to draw expressions, and they don't have to do it precisely like this. They can do it similar, but everything has to be in character. You couldn't just draw an expression that you might have seen on Bugs Bunny or on Your Neighbor or something, because that wouldn't fit the character. The expressions you put on a character and the movements, they have to be in character. And so here, this is Robin and Sean Bean's character, which I like to call him. You can see, once again, you have the color separations on Robin. So you saw the film, and I'm sure you realized that she didn't have these very distinctive triangles on her face or across her nose. But here's the final picture you would see on screen. And you can't really see, I know it's a low quality picture, but you can't really see the color separation there, but it is there. So it seems like too much attention to detail, perhaps, that we had to draw these triangles and make sure the triangles were on model and keep the same proportions on every frame. And then all you see on the final shot is like this. You can't even see them. But that's the quality standard we had to keep to. And here's again Robin as a wolf, and you can see the color separations here. And this is a frame from cleanup, so you can see all of the sketch lines I was talking about. They remain in the final image, which would be like this. Here's a comparative final image, and you can see the outline is kind of sketchy here because we kept the sketch lines in there. And the color separations around the edge of her face, you can see how the color unit used that there. So that was really useful. And that's a very common process in animation, is that the cleanup artist draws lines that they don't even see when the thing is finished, but it's there for the color department. And this is a model sheet for Robin's hands. And again, just like with the face, you need to make sure that all of the hand movements and all of the drawings of the hand are in character. You don't draw hands movements which would apply to a different character. The hand movements have to apply to her. And this is also just useful as a guide to drawing hand movements in general. So if you need to draw a fist for Robin, as an artist, you're going to know how to draw a fist anyway, but this shows you how to draw a fist in the style of this film, and again, within character for Robin. So here's a cleanup scene in progress. Whoa, what have we done? And so you can see we have a guide to the background and the foreground and the other characters in the scene, so that we know more for the animator, really. The animator knows where to place everything. And this also helps with perspective. So if she was to come from the door forwards to the table, then having all of this scenery detail here would show the animator how exactly to do that, what size those perspective drawings should be. And so you can see, yeah, this is a finished cleanup frame. So this is as it would be after the cleanup artist has done the scene, such as myself, with the color separations and the sketch lines. And yeah, this one had 2 characters in it. We wouldn't draw any of these things like the pots and the food. That would just be done by the scenery artist. This is quite a nice action shot with the kestrel flying around there. And there you have a prop, and you have the character, 2 characters. So you can imagine, as I don't know if this was one of my drawings or if I took it from a colleague of mine, but whoever worked on this would have had to use 3 model sheets. You don't have to, there's no rule saying that you need to have these model sheets open all of the time, but to be honest, if you didn't, then you would make mistakes. So typically the cleanup artist would have the model sheet for Robin, the model sheet for the bird, and the model sheet for the arrow, and you would keep switching windows between each model sheet to make sure you know what you're doing, and everything's on model. And we work, you'll see later when I show you a photo from the studio, everyone works with 2 monitors. So you have the drawing tablet that you're drawing onto, and this is also, it's a monitor, so you can see the film as you're drawing onto the film. And then you have a second monitor which you use for references such as model sheets, related scenes, sometimes photos of items that you might need to reference while you're drawing. I think it would be very difficult to work just with 1 monitor. You can show the video of Wolfwalkers. Obviously, it's not the full film, but it's about a 3-minute video from the production of Wolfwalkers. So you saw a lot of the production there. It showed you some of the backgrounds and some of the animation and the cleanup there. The studio you saw in that video was actually not our studio, but that was the studio in Ireland. But it's pretty much the same, I guess. Yeah, so while I was working on Wolf Walkers, I still had a temporary contract at the studio, but then boss was quite happy with my work, so he offered me a permanent contract there, which is extremely useful. If you've been listening to my story so far, then you realize why. So yeah, I accepted that one, and I've stayed there since. So that was in 3 or so years ago. We worked on that one, I guess. After Wolf Walkers, there wasn't a feature film that we moved on to immediately, but what you're seeing now is a still from a short film which we made called The Weird Gang Project. And this was entirely made by us. It's a strange story, really, because this is something that the studio started making a long time before I joined. And then there was some kind of issue with the director where he had a falling out with the other staff, and he actually left the studio halfway through the project, so the project went on hold. And then when I was there and we didn't have a major project at that time, the boss decided to revive this project, and so he assigned a new director to it, and then we finished this project. And so I did some coloring on this. It was very fun. It's a little cartoony, it's for young adults, I suppose, little story about aliens. And that was quite temporary. And then this was another short film we made, directed by the lead animator in the studio at the time, whose name is Nicholas Debray. And on this one, I did some coloring of the scenery, which was really just a very simple little click and fill each color kind of job. As you can tell here, like in spaces like on the wall and on the chairs, I just had to fill the colors in. It didn't require a lot of skill. And what you're seeing here is the kind of image I worked with. So it's the scenery, and it has parts of the image from the storyboard within the scenery, just so that the image makes sense. And that's Abigail. And then after Abigail, we worked on this film called Le Voyage du Prince, The Prince's Journey, about these kind of monkey men. It's a fantasy story. It's another French film. This was made with a studio called Blue Spirit, which I think is in Paris. You can see it in the top. Blue Spirit and Melusine Productions. So when you see Melusine Productions, that's the name of our studio that goes on the films. It's really like the production label, but if you work within the industry, then you animate within Studio 352. It's kind of the same thing, but it's not the same thing. And on this film, I did some work on the scenery, and I didn't really get on with it very well, so I just worked on it for a short time. As you can see here, it was a very particular kind of style and very highly detailed. So it has this kind of pencil line aesthetic to it. It's not what you would call naive. It's not an amateur kind of style, but at the same time, it's not realistic either. It's not very precise. And so I found it really difficult to replicate in my drawings. And also, we had to draw a drawing like this, you had to know a little bit about the kind of architectural style they wanted, and also the plants. So you have a kind of world where there's I suppose it's like a 18th and 19th century French urban world, which is also within a jungle. So that requires knowing a lot about just having experience drawing those kinds of things, which I didn't, to be honest. So I drew a few backgrounds for this film, and then they moved me on to a different kind of task on the film, because clearly it wasn't working very well for me. thankfully, they weren't too disappointed. I didn't lose my job or anything because, you know, they can just put us onto a different task in the studio. We're still valuable as artists to them, even if we can't do one particular role. So unfortunately, the role I had to do after that was something very technical and not very creative at all, and quite boring. I had to kind of fill flat colors in around each layer. You might not think there are many layers looking at this, but I think there would have been a layer for the foreground here, and then a layer for each building, and then several layers for the background, and then a layer for the railings over here. So in Photoshop, I had to really zoom in and kind of fill in white shapes inside everything and make sure everything was really, really clean and tidy. And then after that, I had to do something even less creative, which was moving files around and making sure all the files were named correctly and were everything fit the right technical requirement, which was completely unusual and strange to me. The guy who explained to me how to do this, the supervisor in that department, he didn't speak English very well, and he said, your French is good, is it? And I was like, oh, oui, bon français. When really the answer is no, but he kind of explained to me, and I just followed along what he was telling me, and somehow it worked, but it was almost a nightmare situation, really, when someone speaking a different language to you is explaining a very technical job, and you're just nodding and going, yeah, I think I understand, and just hoping the next project came along quickly. So anyway, I shouldn't complain because it was really easy. It was just, as I said, moving files around, changing some technical details, and then sending them on. It's not what I wanted to be doing there, but it was easy. So in the end, it worked. And then after that, I did some more coloring work on Ernest and Celestine 2, Le Voyage en Charre B, which I think is called something different in English and is called something different in Spanish. But basically, it's Ernest and Celestine 2. Ernest and Celestine, our studio worked on before I joined the studio, which is why we were asked to work on the sequel again. And usually we don't work on sequels. The boss at the studio chooses every project for us, and he doesn't really like the idea of sequels, which is kind of similar to me, really. A lot of what you see in cinemas today is either a sequel or a prequel or a reboot, and there's something quite non-creative about that. And I think he feels the same way, so he doesn't usually accept sequels. But he likes this franchise so much that he selected this film, and he was happy for us to work on it. So this is a still. I think this is the final image from the film, so you can see it has the shadows in there, and it has the kind of resolution and the film grain which you see in the final film, which looks a bit different when you're working on it. I don't really have an example. Here's a model sheet of Celestine, the mouse. Yeah, this is really useful for, I think it's mainly for the color department because you have the color palette on the right here, but it also has some tips on how to draw, for example, the ears down here, non trop anguleux, non trop arrondi, non trop allongé, and then the final one is just right. It's a bit like Goldilocks. So I was doing color, and similar to the Swallows of Kabul, you can see that there aren't outlines around everything. You see you have colors here. So as a color artist, we would have had to, actually as the cleanup artist, they would have had to draw lines around here. And I think as color artists, we put the shadows on here. So every film has a slightly different arrangement for the artists. Sometimes the color artist does the shadows as well. Sometimes the cleanup artist will draw the lines I was talking about to show the color separations. Sometimes that's actually done by the color artists. It depends on how the authorities in each production want to
arrange the teams and how they want the film to work. There is no formula for every single film, but it's decided at the beginning of each production. And this is another film to work on. I don't know if any of you have seen this, The Summit of the Gods. Not really. So this is quite new anyway. I think, well, it was in cinemas recently, but only in small independent cinemas. It wasn't in the big cinemas. And this was made with, I've got it written down, Folivari, another French studio. And this is based on a manga called, well, it's, I don't know what the Japanese name is, but the French name is Le Sommet des Dieux, Summit of the Gods, written by Jiro Taniguchi. It's a series of books, but it's one complete story, The Summit of the Gods. And it's about mountain climbers, basically. I won't tell you the whole story, but it's about mountain climbers. And it's completely different to a lot of the other things we've worked on, but I think the final image is really nice looking, and it's not completely like the comic book. I don't have a good example, but the facial details are quite different to the way Taniguchi draws the faces in his comic. But so the style is slightly different, but it's the artist was still happy with that. I think from what I've heard, Taniguchi was still happy. It has its own style, but it still represents the comic closely enough. And on this, I was doing cleanup. Again, I was doing the assistant animation cleanup, which was really pretty challenging on this one. I think everybody, I wouldn't say struggled, but everybody had some frustrations working on this. And that was, again, because of the attention to detail. You can see all of the ropes here. We had to draw all of these tiny little details on the ropes, had to make sure the cup kept the same proportions in every shot. And you have all of these kind of details down here, the hiking gear, the climbing gear. Over here, we have to draw things like the backpack. Yeah, so many ropes and buckles and details like that. I don't want to sound bitter about it because I still like the film and I'm grateful to have worked on it, but it's fair to say there were frustrations working on that one. I don't say this very often because it sounds a bit egotistical, but I really do recommend you have a look for that one and see if you can find it. I think it was streamed online. Oh, it says down here Netflix, so maybe have a look on Netflix. See if you can see The Summit of the Gods. It's a really, really nice story. It's very, it's mature and it's very moving in some places. Just to see what you think of it. And then this is one we finished very recently. I don't have a lot to show you from this because it's still confidential mostly. So this, yeah, sorry. This is Kensuke's Kingdom, featuring these actors here. So these are quite famous. Ken Watanabe, Cillian Murphy is in, he was in a Batman film and he's in Peaky Blinders and various other things. So often, yeah, there are quite famous people working on them. And when we're working on these films, I usually tease the manager. I joke with the manager and say, when's Cillian Murphy coming in then? We're going to meet him at some point. And he's always saying, no, stop asking, you're not going to meet him. Sadly, they don't really know much about our studio, so they don't feel any inclination to come in and visit. Where there was one time I was working on, yeah, when we finished The Breadwinner, I came in late to the studio one morning, which I probably shouldn't have done, but anyway, I arrived late, and when I got there, there was a video playing in the main foyer, the main hall of the studio, and it was Angelina Jolie saying a big thank you to everyone for working on her film, because she was the co-producer on The Breadwinner, and that was quite a big surprise because that doesn't usually happen. So that was quite special, and I feel a little bit bad for arriving late. I had no idea we were going to be having a video. It wasn't a video call, but it was a recording from Angelina Jolie personally thanking us. So that was quite nice. And Kensuke's Kingdom, I'm not sure. I think it would be this similar to Sommet des Dieux, where it will be shown in independent cinemas. I think it'll be shown on British TV because it was made with Lupus, which is a studio based in London. And this, I'm allowed to show you this. This is available for the public. This is Kensuke on the right and Micah on the left, and an orangutan and a dog. This is actually quite nice to draw and clean up because the lines are very flowing and continuous. It might be hard to see here, but there are different line thicknesses. So you can see around the shoulder here, the lines are quite thick, and then on the interior details, the lines are very delicate, thin, and this is another thing we had to pay attention to and make sure that was consistent and make sure we didn't give all of the lines the same thickness. So it sounds quite unpleasant, but really I like that one better than some other films we've worked on. I like the style. The faces are a bit kind of weird. I wouldn't have drawn them like that while designing it, but yeah, everything else is quite nice. And this is the dog who's called, I can't remember the name right now, but yeah, sorry. So again, just like the Wolfson and Wolfwalkers, we had to make sure all of the hairs were consistent through each frame. And you can almost barely see some of them around the sides here, but the supervisors could see them, and they made sure that we did them properly. Otherwise, we would have to go back in and correct it. But even so, I quite like it because the way the dog moves, and the way the animator animated the dog just made it quite a pleasant thing to work on, which I'm sure most of you can appreciate as artists. And then we have some photos of the studio. So this is some colleagues of mine. I think there are 8 rooms for the artists. And this is, you can't see the entire room here, but you can see most of it. And these are some of my colleagues as they were, I think, 3 years ago, working on a project. Yeah, you can see, so we have a drawing tablet, and then we have a second monitor, and then we have a keyboard. The way I work, I don't think it's the same with everyone, but the way I work is to always have one hand on the keyboard. So I'm using keyboard shortcuts, and the other hand is on the drawing tablet. So I try to make it so I don't even look at the keyboard, but I can just do it by touching the keyboard. I know where the shortcuts are. I can change tool, change magnification, drag the image around and things like that, just without even looking. And on the other hand is drawing. This is a colleague of mine working on The Stories of Kabul. And this is quite unusual. She does have a second monitor here, but she's also chosen to have some printed out model sheets here. The ones which are most useful to her. Mainly, to be honest, I think the reason with that is, well, you can just see my arm through there. This is me sitting opposite her. I don't think she wanted to look at my face all day long, so she stuck up some paper. But anyway, this is another colleague of mine working on the same film, and he's doing colour. And he has the timeline here. I guess you know what the timeline is, and then we call it the canvas. So he's painting up here, and then he's moving through each frame in the timeline down here. This is a very recent picture because this is what I'm working on right now. I'm not supposed to show you any material, but this photo is available. This photo is available online, so it's in public access anyway. So this is a project called Mère Anonyme, or Mothers Anonymous, and it's a kind of comedy French little TV series. It's a series of 3-minute episodes about mothers discussing their problems, and it's really funny, and it has a very cartoony, sketchy style. And yeah, he's working in color down here, and he has the model sheet on the second monitor over here. I'm actually working in animation on this one, which is quite nice. I get to make all of the characters move as I want them to, and then send that to the assistant animator, and I say, clean up my mess, and then they do. And then this is the final image. This is some other films we've worked, well, this is other films the studio worked on before I joined the studio. Song of the Sea was another one made by Cartoon Saloon, the same people who wrote and made Wolfwalkers and The Breadwinner. Ethel and Ernest, which I was going to work on, but they, for some reason, put me on a different project. And the first Ernest and Celestine film here, which was really successful and won a bunch of awards in the animation industry. Has anyone seen The Congress, the film on the top left? So this is really interesting because when I was in Croatia, I watched this film and fell in love with it immediately. It's a kind of science fiction film, which is half animation and half live action. And I'm a big sci-fi nerd, so I really enjoyed watching this film. It was really unexpected. It's based on a novel by Lem, the Polish author. And I really enjoyed that. And then I didn't know anything about Studio 352. Eventually, when I was invited to work at 352, and I found myself actually in the studio working in there, I saw a big poster for the Congress on the wall, and I said, "You didn't work on that film here, did you?" And they said, "Yeah, we animated most of it." And it just kind of like, wow, I just stepped into something like a dream job, really, because this studio made this film, which is one of my favorite films. It's what an incredible pleasure that was to find myself in that place. And that's pretty much the end of my story at the moment. I think we've come full circle. So yeah, that's the end of the pictures. Thank you. Have a great evening. Good luck to everyone.